Hello, everybody. We'll give it just another minute or two. Slight technical issue getting everybody in. So we'll give it, like I said, just another 60 seconds or so.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Give it just another minute. Hopefully a few more join us here. All right, we'll get going. Welcome everybody to the CCP meeting this afternoon, primarily focused on strategic planning. Can we please, Julie, have a roll call? I was notified by the Sheriff's Department this morning that Matt Davis will be attending for them.
Okay, Member Davis, Matt Davis.
Present.
Member Evans,
Present.
Member Jakowski,
Present.
Member Lewis. I don't see him yet. Member Miller,
Present.
Member Johnson. Member Raven,
Here.
Member Sullivan. Member Valdez. Member Vega,
Present.
Member Villegas. Or Member Provenza, is he here? And Member Fruitnick.
Here.
Okay, we have 7 members present.
Nolan just appeared on too, so.
Okay. Member Nolan, Member Sullivan.
Here.
Okay, we'll count. Thank you.
Brings us to agenda item number 3, consider approval of the agenda. Hope everyone's had an opportunity to look it over, and if it's acceptable, can I get a motion to approve?
Sure, this is Miller. I'll make that motion.
Jonathan, second.
First by Chief Miller and second by Jonathan.
Member Davis,
Aye.
Member Evans.
Aye.
Member Jakowski,
Aye.
Member Lewis. Oh, I didn't call. Okay, Member Lewis is absent. Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Olson.
Aye.
And Tracy, I apologize, I missed you. I called the wrong name under your department, so I'll add you as present. I didn't think that was right. I just didn't catch it. Okay, member Raven?
Aye.
Member Sullivan?
Here.
Member Valdez? Absent. Member Vega?
Yes.
Member Villegas is absent. Member Fruitnick?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next up is agenda item number 4, opportunity for members of the public to address the CCP on subjects relating to CCP business and not otherwise on the agenda. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comment?
I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, no public comment. Brings us to the consent agenda. We thought we would streamline some of the more routine tasks of the CCP on a consent agenda item moving forward. It doesn't mean that someone can't pull agenda item or for further discussion or to abstain, etc. But it will help us hopefully streamline the beginning of the meeting where we don't have to do roll call vote after roll call vote after roll call vote. So hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to review the consent agenda. And if it makes sense and there's no questions or concerns with the 3 topics, can I get a motion to approve? So the 3
Chief,
top-
I had a, sorry,
Go ahead.
Chief, I had a question on item number 7. Does that mean that at some point at a future CCP meeting, we'll need to have a vote to fill the community-based organization position? I don't think
Yeah.
we've gone through that, at least since I've been with CCP, and when that's been vacated and how we select a new entity or person for that role.
Yes, it's new to a lot of us. I've been working with county council to kind of figure out the next steps. I don't know, Phil, if you want to help enlighten us on this.
Yeah, so technically this is for an individual from a CBO with experience, and I'm reading now from our bylaws, which mirror the statute, with experience in successfully providing rehabilitative services to persons who have been convicted of a criminal offense. And that's a person who will be selected by the CCP to join the CCP. So we'll have to do some outreach to try and identify 1 or more candidates for that position. I think Chief Fruitnick would appreciate any suggestions or support that folks on the CCP might be able to provide. And you can follow up with him separately if there's somebody you know of who might be interested and qualified for the position that you can then, here as staff can then reach out to. But that's the position and how we'll approach the vacancy in a nutshell. Chief, is there anything you want to add?
No, just we will obviously be working through the process, and there will be something brought back in a future meeting or 2 for an update and through the process and candidates, etc. Any other questions on the consent agenda, which again is to authorize remote meetings, approve the minutes, and then to accept the resignation of Mark, those 3 topics.
I appreciate that clarification. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
First by Ian, is there a second to approve?
I'll second.
Okay, second, Horacio. I guess I should ask if there's any public comment on this agenda item. Julie, do we have any public comment?
No, I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, so we have a first and a second. Can we get a vote to approve the consent agenda?
Member Davis?
Aye.
Member Evans?
Aye.
Member Jakowski?
Aye.
Member Lewis? Is absent. Member Miller?
Aye.
Member Olson?
Aye.
Member Raven?
Aye.
Did you answer, Member Raven?
Aye.
Oh, thank you. Member Sullivan?
Yes.
Member Valdez? Okay, absent. And Member Vega?
Yes.
And Member Fruitnick?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Number 8, member announcements. Is there any, we just had a member announcement discussion in the process for that. Is there any other member announcements or anything they'd like to bring up? Not seeing any boxes light up or anybody come off mute. We'll move to number 9. Receive and file Department 21-22 program summaries. This item is to receive and file the CCP funded program summaries for fiscal year 21-22. As noted in the staff report, to CCP through its budget policy committed to outcome reporting. This is the first pass at year-end reporting, unless a work in progress, which will be further refined by the work of the outcomes and metrics ad hoc and through the strategic planning process. I'll open it up to the CCP for comments or questions about the receive and file of the department summaries.
Chair, this is Miller. I had one question.
Go ahead, Chief.
And so I thought they were all great reports, and I was wondering if the ad hoc committee is going to be doing some sort of like formalized report format. So it's, I mean, basically like apples to apples when we're reviewing the reports. I thought there were good parts of each report.
Yes, absolutely. That's the plan. Moving forward, the ad hoc will be meeting to try to develop some of this through the strategic planning process over the next couple months. We'll be discussing metrics and outcomes as well. I believe the halftime CCP analyst starts next Monday, and that should help us push forward with things as well, as far as getting things kind of pushed forward and through and get the ad hoc meeting again, et cetera.
Yeah, and again, like kind of a standardized report format would be, I think, beneficial to even the folks that have to do the report.
No, absolutely. Hopefully we'll land on a model and go from there. Any other comments from the CCP? I'm not seeing any. Julie, is there any public comment on this agenda item?
I see no hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next up is agenda 10. And this is to start going over the strategic planning process. We do have Kara Hunter here to help report out on the community engagement meetings and to help us through this process. Our work today will end with identifying high-level objectives for each goal. Subsequent meetings of the CCP will be devoted to developing specific actions to further those objectives and identifying metrics to measure success. And with that being said, I'll turn it over to Kara.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry, I was just adjusting to, I was a normal attendee and now I'm a panelist. So now I can see everyone's faces, which is going to be really helpful in facilitating this discussion. It's good to be with you, Kara Hunter. I run the YOLO Conflict Resolution Center. What I thought I would do is just briefly report out kind of a summary of what we learned in the community meetings that were held in July and earlier this month, and then maybe start a preliminary discussion about what kind of changes we might want to see to the mission and goals of the CCP. I recognize that that is a dense question. My hope is that folks had the opportunity to review the information in the incredibly well-organized packet. Whoever did that should get props because that was very well organized. But I'll start with just giving kind of a brief summation of the community engagement meetings, which can be found in attachment A if you have your packet handy. How this worked, if you weren't present at the meeting, is that we had breakout rooms in which we had community members consider 2 questions. 1, should the CCP change its mission and goals? And 2, as a community or a community member, where would you like the CCP and its partners to focus their planning efforts and attention? Now, I want to say, in having reviewed a lot of the feedback given from community members, I think what immediately jumped out to me is that it demonstrates that the community may not have access to the current effort and practices currently being exercised by many of your departments. And I think that's a real telling for us, just to recognize that some of the feedback that we received may just be from a not knowing what is currently being done and what is currently being practiced or not having a clear, transparent understanding of the current efforts. If you have not had a chance to look over those pages, a couple of things that I think were repeated throughout the public comments were more efforts on prevention and systemic causes. I think a lot of us maybe have heard some of this type commentary before, where we would really like to see folks never become a part of the justice system. And so that was very much made clear by some of the public comments. Similar to that is a more effort on upstream efforts. What can we do preliminarily so that we, again, don't see folks eventually find their way into the justice system? We also had comments from folks about more inclusion of community-based organizations, not having this effort be driven primarily by the public agencies. And then also more inclusion of the community and having their input on the way that priorities are made and decisions are made. I know those community meetings were an attempt at that, but certainly there was a recognition that folks would like to be more involved, which I think is a good thing. And then also just some little things about more clarity on recidivism. Are people coming back into the system after participating in some of the services that are available? Are there gaps? Are there still areas where services just aren't available? And what are those gaps? And what could the CCP be doing to maybe better not only identify those gaps, but also fill those gaps? And then finally, looking at our goals in equal measure and not necessarily prioritizing one goal over another. So that is essentially what we learned from the public. There's more, details on the attachment A. There's a couple of pages there that just kind of more fully express that summary that I just gave. Let me pause here for a second and see if any of the members have any thoughts or questions about anything that I've shared so far. Doesn't seem like it. Okay. So what I thought we might do to sort of kick off this effort in thinking about a strategic plan and also, what changes the CCP members might like to see be made, if any, is to ask you all the same questions that we asked the community, starting with, should the CCP change its mission and goals in any ways? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And so I'm wondering, maybe if each of you can take a second or two to think about that. Should the CCP change any of its mission and goals? If yes, how? If no, why not? I wonder if each of us might be able to take an opportunity and just weigh in from, your perspective on whether or not changes should be made to the mission and goals. You can find the mission and goals spelled out if you don't have it in front of you, again, in that packet under attachment A, exhibit 1. It's in the form of a PowerPoint slide if it's helpful to have those right in front of you. So I'm putting the question to you all. Should the CCP change its mission and goals?
Carol, I'll start.
Please.
I think there can be some tweaking. I don't have all the verbiage perfectly laid out, but
Okay.
I do like the idea of not necessarily saying goal 1, 2, and 3. I don't think that was our intent to say one was a priority over the others. I do like the idea of just saying our goals are, and not necessarily prioritizing that way. We've kind of informally have already done it, but get rid of the term offender and change it to individual, consistent throughout all of our wording and documents.
Okay.
I don't know if we tweak a goal or add a goal, and I realize this is primarily in my shop, but I do think we ought to focus on measuring and recidivism, and it's kind of the big thing in the room that we just haven't been able to push through. We have made some progress in it. I should be able to report out in January or so, the 2017, 18, and 19 cohorts and their 3 years. But I do think it's something we should have as our goal to be able to report out on that. And again, I realize that's mainly in my shop to do, but those are some of my overall thoughts just initially.
Okay. Thank you, Chief, for that. Go ahead, Nolan.
I think I'm a very, very new member to the CCP, like just a couple meetings. So for me, just the lack of familiarity is probably one of the biggest hurdles and barriers. You know, I think right now in our own department, we're going through what we're calling a reconnection to the strategic plan. So, I mean, honestly, COVID sort of sidelined everything and everyone's attention went in 25 different directions. And so in the few meetings that I've had with this group, I do feel like we can inject some energy or kind of reconnect or more passion kind of back into the project. So it may be more of a reconnection also, instead of maybe a redo or a redraft, but some sort of way to make the plan alive again and kind of bring it back to life, especially as we're hopefully maybe kind of sort of exiting COVID, knock on wood. But I think that would be helpful, at least from my vantage point. But again, I'm a short timer, so.
Yeah, no, thank you, Nolan. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of entities, organizations, agencies that work with a strategic plan are experiencing something similar, where we sort of disconnected over the last couple of years because of COVID and now starting to re-embrace what the mission and efforts should be. So thank you for that. I think that's an important comment. Other thoughts? Do we love it? Ian, do we love the mission?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chief and also what Nolan said. I mean, I don't necessarily have feedback other than what Dan said and some of the verbiage, you know, we've talked about before with shifting the mission and goals. I think for me, it's more in the other details of the strategic plan. We've talked before, you know, about building it out in kind of more of a SMART goal type way, or building it out more in the way of the county strategic plan, how that was built with like tactics and timelines and leads and stuff. And so I think, you know, just being a part of that county strategic plan process for the last several years, it's been helpful to have it broken down in that way, estimated, you know, timeframes and assigned leads for each of those, so that you know, have quarterly or biannual report backs, and, you know, the group is kind of checking in. I think we had some good ideas kind of underneath the goals in each one, good tactics. You know, I forget exactly what we called them, but, you know, there weren't necessarily assigned point people. There were assigned departments, and there wasn't a timeline last time. And so I think building in some of those components will be helpful. But overall, I think the, you know, the mission and the goals, I think, are fine with minor tweaks, like Chief was saying.
Okay, some of the words. Okay, thank you, Ian. And I think from my understanding, the discussion we're having today is just thinking about more broad strokes about changes we might want to see to the mission, and subsequent meetings would look at action steps and timelines and things that we want to start to plug into the overall strategic plan to bring it to life, sort of what Nolan was saying, where we want to kind of reconnect or re-energize the effort by putting some names and some deadlines to things. So I think that's going to happen in subsequent meetings, is my understanding. So thank you, Ian. Other thoughts, other comments? Do we think the mission is upholding what you all feel like the CCP is actually doing? Are we protecting the public by holding individuals accountable and providing opportunities that support victim and community restoration, individual rehabilitation, and successful reintegration? Are we doing that, we think, with some of the programs that CCP is funding?
I think I think what we're doing is very consistent with some of those changes, the public wanted to see. So maybe it is a matter of making some changes to the language to make the language consistent with what we are doing, you know, what we actually are doing. And when I say what we are doing, it doesn't mean we can't be doing a better job at that, like especially on the area of reentry that comes to mind. But I think if the individuals who had those comments saw what's actually happening, they would realize what we're doing is fairly consistent with what they want to see us do. So we need to then kind of tweak the language to make it consistent with what we are doing and where our focus is.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Jonathan. I think one of the comments that came at the end of the community engagement meeting feedback was, you know, how can we be more transparent with the work that we're doing? How can we make that information more available to the public so they know how we're responding to, you know, maybe past requests for changes or input from even years ago, one of the suggestions is how do we currently interact with the PIO, with the Public Information Officer? How can we make sure that the efforts that are being made, the changes that are being made, the good work that's being done is being presented to the community in a way that they can receive it and hear it?
So the work, so I'm sort of the, in a way, appointed PIO for a lot of those programs. So
Okay.
And so that information is out there. I put out quite a lot of information in terms of, you know, a mental health court graduation or the outcome measures, which is all driven, or much of which is driven by CCP funding in terms of the staffing from all the different collaborative partners. I haven't in those press releases, you know, kind of made that connect to the CCP funding, and maybe that's something I could do. But if people are paying attention and they understand that mental health court staff from all agencies is heavily funded by the CCP, they would get to see the outcomes.
Yeah.
You know? So I can,
Yeah.
I mean, I can work on trying to make that connection. The problem is a lot of people just don't, you know, read the Enterprise or
Right.
other media outlets. So
Right.
they're not paying attention then, and they're not reading the local media, the Democrat or the Enterprise, then they're not going to know what we're doing. But if they are,
Right.
they'll see what we're doing.
Or to that point, Jonathan, and I appreciate that because I know you have put out quite a bit of information. I've read it. But if folks don't read the newspaper, you know, what are some other ways? And we don't have to get into this right now. I think the subsequent meetings will look at action steps and planning, but what are other ways that we can reach the community in ways that maybe is even more accessible than, you know, some press releases in the newspaper? Well, we don't have to debate that, but I can appreciate the effort that's already been made, Jonathan. So thank you.
I can tell you, and a lot of the press releases these press releases are actually put out by our county PIO, not by my office. I write them, you know, and he puts them out because it's a county county information, not necessarily DA information.
Right.
But that's an extreme challenge in trying to educate the public, you know, on what we're doing. And I've been working on that for 16 years. So
right. I hear you.
You know, social media, it's just really challenging to do.
It is. It's an ongoing effort. I totally get it. Thank you. Tracy, did you want to add something?
The CCP has a media committee. It's just that I don't think we've met or put anything out since before Frutnick got named chief. I mean, I think we just haven't done anything, but we do have a media committee. It's made up of different people from this group, with the idea that those press releases, or whatever you want to call them, the information that was going to go out would be from the CCP versus an individual entity. Like if Jonathan's saying he's kind of trying to cover everything, but I think it could be confusing coming out of the DA's office. I think probably CCP information needs to come from the CCP.
And it's not really coming from the DA's office, as I just said, Tracy. It's generally coming from the county PIO. But I think that rather than coming from the PIO, it would make sense to maybe have it come from the CCP.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the press releases come out on your letterhead, so that's why I'm saying it could.
No, what I'm saying, Tracy, is generally for those press releases, I have the PIO send them out.
I understand that.
Yeah. So,
On your letterhead. I got it.
no, not on our letterhead. PIO sends them out on their letterhead.
I'll look them.
One comment that was received in the chat would be, what about linking some of this information to the CCP website? So I think these are all good ideas. And I think to your point, Jonathan, that it is hard. It is hard to know where people are going to receive their information. Where are they taking in information when, you know, maybe what's going on in corrections isn't at the forefront of their mind. But what I think might be, or what I took away from reading some of the public comments from the meetings, is that folks just don't know. Folks don't know what the good work is. And maybe it's, you know, like you said, Jonathan, a disconnect between what the efforts of the CCP specifically are and what we're seeing happening in the community, that there may be a disconnect there. So Tracy, did you have another comment, or did you just not take your hand down? Okay. Ian, what you got?
And I I think this is maybe getting further into the weeds than where you wanted to go, Kara. If we're staying mission, goal level today, although it sounds like we're somewhat in agreement that the mission and goal is pretty good where it's at. I think the other piece that'll be important as we build out our new strategic plan and then, build the budget ongoing year after year is that we're tying the budget back to the strategic plan. Because, a lot of to Jonathan's points, a lot of the departments get some funding from CCP for their part of mental health court, part of the DA, public defender and stuff. But HHSA doesn't get any money for the collaborative courts. So I think that is a piece that we'll need to consider, especially as a grant goes away, right? We've talked about before that if we want to keep the capacity at 30 for mental health court, that may be something we need to look to CCP or other funding for in the future. And so I think, the more we can tie how the funding with CCP aligns to the strategic plan items and build that out, I think we'll just have better alignment overall as a entity. And we'll be able to look back 3 years from now and say that we met, the majority of our goals or hopefully all of our goals because we funded the efforts we said were our priorities in our strategic plan.
Yep. Thank you, Ian. That's well said. And we're gonna talk about priorities here in a minute, but I want to create some space for Carlene or Rocio, Chief Miller, Matt Davis, if there's any comments either of you have about considering the mission of CCP and if there's anything within that mission or the goals that you think you might like to see changed. Yes, here's how. No, I think it's great.
I appreciate what was said initially by the chief and Nolan. Basically, maintaining the spirit, perhaps making it more current.
Okay. Yeah. Giving it kind of a, what did Nolan say? A reconnection or a re-energizing of the.
And I would agree with that.
Yeah. Particularly after the last couple of years have passed, we're living in a different world. So maybe it is time to breathe some new life into that. So thank you, Matt. Carlene or Rocio or Chief Miller?
This is Chief Miller. I really have nothing to add to the conversation. I'm listening and concur with what's being said.
Right on. Okay.
Same. I like the plan that we have now, but I also agree that, things have become a little bit disconnected since COVID. So it'll be nice to just kind of get a fresh start and also removing the numbers so that there's no confusion from members of the public of, that the goals are equally important.
Thank you, Rocio. Carlene?
Yeah, thanks, Kara. I don't think I have anything more to add than what's been shared already. I agree with the feedback that's been shared so far, and I feel a bit newer to CCP, so I think still feeling it out here. So thank you.
Fair enough. Yeah, thank you, Carlene. Chief?
I was just looking at some of the comments. Yes, we're going to have a public comment at the end of this agenda item, and so we'll be able to get their feedback and at the end of it. Just wanted
Good.
to
Thank you.
put that out there. Yes.
Thank you. I wasn't looking at the chat box. I appreciate you saying that. Okay, so we'll leave the mission goals conversation for now, unless anyone else has any comments. Jill, I certainly didn't mean to leave you out if you had anything you wanted to say. But go ahead, Jill.
No, I'm not a member, so I'm just here to listening, but thank you for the offer, Kara. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. So let's take a look at the second question that we asked the community about planning efforts and attention. Maybe some of the priorities are shifting, particularly over the last couple of years as we thought about, where are the needs? Are there any gaps? Are there things that we should be considering prioritizing higher than maybe we did in the last strategic plan was drafted? I'm wondering where folks see that at the moment. Is there something that right away comes to the top of your mind and say, oh my gosh, if CCP isn't paying attention to this, the whole world's going to fall apart? Is there something that we really want to see as a priority for the CCP strategic plan? And I'll just open this up to anyone at the moment. If we're thinking about protecting the public by holding individuals accountable and providing opportunities that support victim and community restoration, individual rehabilitation, and successful reintegration, what needs to be at the top of that list? Ian, sorry, I just saw your hand.
First, but we've all put a lot of effort since like 2017, 2018 in the sequential intercept mapping process, and we have that built out. We have priority gaps and needs. And so I think as we look as a CCP to look at what are those, where do we need to focus our attention? I think we have that document that has kind of spoken to the gaps and needs throughout our entire system, from first
Right.
point of contact all the way through reentry and community engagement. So, for me, that's a good starting point to look at some of the kind of lower level strategies or tactics that we end up building in underneath each of the goals.
Great. Yeah, you're right. I forgot about your mapping. That's such an important tool, I think, to look at the process in its entirety and then make some determinations about how we fill those gaps, or how those gaps are currently being filled, and are they being filled in the way that we would hope and that we'd like to see continue, or do some changes need to be made. Other thoughts about priorities, things that we think really need to be held at the, I guess, highest priority as we're thinking about the mission of the Community Corrections Partnership. What keeps you up at night? To refresh your memory, some of the comments that we heard from the community have to do with looking at more, mental health services, making sure that we're attuning to practices that are trauma informed, opportunities for folks that are reintegrating to have a more successful reintegration. Tracy, what do you think? What would you like to add?
We just had a training today at lunch internally about all the mental health programs that are out there. We really do have quite a bit, but I would really like to overlay them on what Ian said is the map that we have to see if we're being redundant or not. I think that would be important. And there was a comment about a couple comments about prevention and reintegration. Reintegration is really haphazard, in my opinion. It's some people do a little bit of this and some people do a lot of that, but it's not a very focused effort. So I think we could do some work there. And prevention's tricky because I think that the downstream investments, is that the right word? Is probably the most bang for your buck. But CCP funding is really for a target population that tends to be more reactionary. So I don't get any of my clients until after something's gone wrong.
Right.
I can work with them in the future so that they don't keep getting in trouble. But prevention is a little bit tricky. I do think it's really, really important, but I'm trying to wrestle in my head with how that fits into what this funding was actually for.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tracy. Thank you. Prevention can be really tricky to measure because if we never see them, then we can't measure them. And it's hard to know what worked. If something was preventative and somebody didn't need subsequent services, it may be tricky to measure that. It may go back to what Chief Rutnick was saying is a potential additional goal of looking more closely at recidivism. And as we're having a better understanding of recidivism rates and what's working and what's not working in terms of people coming back into the system, that may be something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, recidivism is also very, very hard because, we can talk for hours on how to define recidivism and whether or not it's even meaningful.
Sure.
But if I have a client, with a lot of problems and my client's out there hurting people and we fix, 70-80% of what's going on, but he still picks up a misdemeanor here and there for a theft. How do you measure that? So I'd be really reluctant to just use recidivism without a hard look at whether or not it's meaningful for us and how to use recidivism. Okay.
Yeah, it's multifaceted for sure. Thank you. Matt, did you have a comment?
I just want to say quickly, I agree with what Tracy started off there with the really focusing on coordinating our reentry efforts.
Yeah, we're still not doing that very well, I think, as a society, even that, folks are coming out of prison or jail. How are just community members feeling about having somebody that has served time as a neighbor or a coworker or whatever, so have you. There's a lot of good work to be done there. Go ahead, Chief.
I was just going to say I support the reentry thought as well and make it maybe a higher priority. I know I've spoken to some on the panel so far of kind of having this idea of some sort of reentry summit where we all get in a room and start identifying what's currently happening, what different silos are, and then we can have a subsequent meeting to try to break those silos. So it sounds like that's something we should start pushing ahead a little bit more.
I think back to Ian's comment about the system, the intercept map might be a good way to help us just kind of track where we are and what's happening and what's not happening, and have some thoughts or evaluation about the different parts of the processes, particularly thinking about reintegration or reentry. Thank you. Other thoughts about priorities? Things that are on the top of your mind. Yeah, Nolan?
I mean, this is kind of redundant a little bit, I think, but one of the areas we struggle with all of our county programs probably is just navigation, right? So as a group of professionals here on this call that all know these programs really well, we're confused. And so if we're confused, our clients are certainly confused, and community partners. And I think, again, we build these amazing programs with the best of intentions, but that navigation, connecting the dots piece is always really, really hard. So, you know, I know in Health and Human Services, you know, we have like 194 programs and sub-programs. It's just impossible for clients to navigate. So thinking about things through a client's lens, or, you know, we may have these amazing programs, but how do they look from a client trying to access those programs in crisis that have all sorts of barriers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well said, Nolan. Thank you. I think that's a really important point. I think somebody said it earlier, Tracy, maybe, that the services are out there. Definitely. It's just, how do we connect the people that need them to the services that are out there? What is the best way to do that? And is that under the purview of the CCP? Is that, you know, how would that intersect with the efforts that you're making and the programs that you're running? And how do we ensure accessibility to the community in the programs that maybe you all oversee or are involved with? Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Chief Miller.
Okay, thank you. So I do have to remind the group that I have yet to hear about victims. Remember, they're also the other part of this this program.
Sure.
And we have to include them somehow, somewhere. We tend to get very focused on, you know, the clients, or like Chief Fruitnick said, I mean, what we used to call offenders. So it kind of, I don't know how to put it, disheartening that, again, we're for neglecting victims as part of this.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chief Miller. Thank you. That we want to hold victims just at the center of this, or even equal to how we're thinking about the offenders, for lack of a better word. Thank you for that.
And I think along those lines, you know, as you know better than anyone, Kara, victims are a huge part of the equation with restorative justice. And that's a big point that people are making, restorative justice. So they're certainly a prime focus, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was one of the comments, actually, Jonathan, thank you, that we received from the community to see more restorative justice. And I think, you know, that's still a rather ambiguous word for most folks to really know what restorative justice is meant to be and what it's not meant to be and how it works, and that it's a victim-centered approach to the administration of justice. But you're right, I think there's still a lot of questions to be answered, but also understandings to be made in that regard. Go ahead, Tracy.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think impliedly, every time we talk about reducing recidivism or getting people healthy or making progress, it is a victim-centered discussion. Even if we don't use those words, I think that anytime we're talking about fixing folks that are committing crimes and making sure that doesn't happen anymore, that is a victim-centered conversation, even if the words aren't used.
Yeah, one less criminal, one less crime, one less victim. Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Other thoughts about priorities? Before we open up, I don't know if we're going to open it up to public comment or look at some things in the chat box. I'm not sure, Chief Fruitnick, how you want to handle that, but certainly if there's any comments that we want to address that are in the chat box from the public, I'm not sure how you want to manage that.
Yeah, what we can do is we can open up public comment on 10A, B, and C right now. So receive public input on community engagement, consider refinement of the CCP missions, and consider refinement of the CCP goals. And then we'll move on to D.
Okay.
So with that, we'll open it up to public comment on those agenda items. Julie?
Okay, I see we have a couple hands raised. First is Brandon Clark.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, cool. I'm concerned, like, and what I thought was interesting. When did the goal of AB 109 shift away from actually helping inmates transition back into society? Because I don't remember any wording in AB 109 that's going to victims programs, and I'm not saying that victim restitution and conflict resolution and programs to help facilitate some sort of well feeling by society isn't like a good or necessary thing, but that's not the focus of what AB 109 was supposed to do. We don't have programs, and we have a ton of people with substance abuse problems. We have one program in the county. We have one that services parole alone. My question is, why is the third goal successful reintegration? Why does it seem like it's such a low priority to keep people from going back to jail? That is like, if somebody's only stealing to eat and they're not robbing people just to get drugs, isn't that success? I mean, it's not measurable easily, but you can see it by the amount of felony crimes prosecuted. And I'm not saying it's going to fix everything, but there's always going to be crime. But if you're stopping people from going back and ruining their lives and their children's lives, that's a huge step in the right direction. And that's something we got to focus on, because there's too many people that don't care because they're just going to go back to jail for whatever dumb reason. And that's the sad part of it right now, is people just assume they're going to go back, so they don't really care to get a job. They don't really care because they don't see opportunities. And I mean, I want to say that I misjudged you, Dan. I had you pegged for like more or less open than you are, and I want to give you my respect for that. Like, you have shown a willingness to consider ideas outside what I figured you would have, and I shouldn't have judged you before actually witnessing more disease things. But I'm blown away by the amount of financing going to places that aren't geared towards helping people get better or get on their feet, like housing and just how to get a program. We have one inpatient, one outpatient, and that's it. And if you live in another city, like they were saying, transportation can kill you. Like just not being able to get, I was living in Sacramento trying to get to Woodland while working, and just to get there when the communicator wanted me there was almost impossible. And I had a car. So I mean, I'm sorry, my thoughts are a little disjointed. It's just so much has been covered that I haven't been able to comment on. And I'm just like, I don't want to be able to, or I don't want to miss an opportunity to offer something that could help. And that's all I want to do. And I want to thank you guys for actually putting us out here so we can take it in some side way. And I'll let go with that.
Thank you, Brandon. And thank you for that input and for your comments. We appreciate it. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, other public comment?
Oh, Julie, we can't hear you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. This is Maria Grijalva. I am the founder and director of Latino Information and Resource Center in West Sacramento, a civil rights advocacy organization. I brought district elections to the city and to the school board, and I am heavily involved, Dan, if in case you're not familiar with me, with local politics. And so I wanted to share, because my adult sons have been in the system, not YOLO, that regarding the mission and goals, there is a resolution that was passed by the Board of Supervisors. Let me try to jump to that screen. It's 2076. And it talks about the hardest conversation there is in the world, which is racism as a public health crisis. And so one of the things it recognizes is that it says, whereas Black and Latinx residents of Yolo County are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. And I remember Tracy trying to bring that to the public attention and got a lot of backslash. And so, you know, we're really in a time that is ever changing, and more than ever, we've seen officers be extremely violent. And just recently, in fact, 20 hours ago, there was 3 Arkansas officers that were seen banging the head of an inmate or someone that they had detained against the cement. And so that was really heartbreaking to see. And we've also seen an increase in the violence against police officers, where they're now being shot. And so that's not good. And so I think that we need to include that resolution inside the mission and goals, because if we don't address the elephant in the room, we're never gonna have prevention. And I'm all for victims, but if you have prevention, you don't have victims. And so the last thing I had jotted here was, let me see. Oh, in using language that is positive, instead of using the language a felon, use the language an individual with a felony history. And that way you degrade the person. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you. Julie, others?
Sorry, Julie, we can't hear you. Was there?
Oh, I'm sorry. There are no other additional hands raised.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those public comments. Did we want to move on to a conversation about the objectives under each goal? Would now be a good time to do that? Hopefully, does that seem right for folks?
Yes, yes, please.
There had been some identified objectives that went along under each of the goals that were identified under the mission. And again, if you have access to your packet, those are spelled out pretty clearly, I think. Similar to the conversation we'd had earlier in terms of looking at the overall mission and goals, and thinking about the objectives that are under those goals, not necessarily action steps at this point, but are there ways or changes to any of the objectives that we might like to see? Some further considerations or tweaks in the language that we might want to consider for the objectives. I'm at the very end of your packet, if that's helpful. I believe it's the very last page.
I don't know, Julia, to put you on the spot, but is there any way we can get it on the screen?
Ooh. Ah, magical. Good idea, Chief. Thank you. Not sure if everyone can see that, but let's start with looking at goal number 1, ensure a safe environment for all residents and visitors by reducing and preventing local crime and reducing recidivism. There's some objectives that are listed there. Thank you, Julie. And again, I'm addressing this to the members. Are there any other considerations that we'd want to make in terms of changes to those objectives, additions to those objectives, things that we think should be considered as we're looking at ensuring a safe environment? Tracy, what you got?
Well, it seems to me that would be a good place. Oh, well, never mind. I was gonna say the reentry, but I'm looking at goal 3. But what goal 1 and goal 3 kind of overlap, I think, is part of the problem. I don't know if we care about that, but they do sort of overlap.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Other thoughts about combining goals? Remember, we had said that they're numbered, but that doesn't necessarily mean priority. I know there was some confusion on that earlier that, why are we prioritizing one goal over the other? But those were just numbered just for number's sake. It's not necessarily defining priority.
Yeah, I think I'll chime in here to say, and just to maybe just throw out something for consideration. So if goal 1 was focused on prevention and reduction of crime, then perhaps recidivism and reintegration, sort of are better connected. I think it's going to overlap no matter what, right? Because if you're preventing, then maybe you're also preventing recidivism. But in my opinion, the prevention, as was mentioned in public comment, right, is a bit upstream. And if you're focusing on building competencies in those who have committed crimes in the past, hopefully reducing recidivism and focusing on effective reintegration, I think maybe those things can go together in a way that maybe makes more sense. So something to consider.
Thank you, Carlene. Appreciate that. Tracy, did you have another comment or you just not put your hand back down? Okay. I always get tricked by that. Other thoughts on some of the objectives, ways that we might condense some of the work that's listed out there, ways that they might be able to work together in terms of achieving the goals that we've identified.
So I have a question. Goal 2. So first off, we have been talking for a long time about taking out the labels. So I know the public has expressed concern and given us feedback on that. We've been talking about that for a number of months, and we've actually made some changes in some of our documents. This is a question for you, Kara. Is accountable the right word when you talk about restorative justice? So individuals who are criminal justice involved, where we call them offenders in this document, is that word accountable the word you would use for restorative justice?
Not in that phrasing, Jonathan, not holding offenders accountable, but offenders taking accountability for their actions or taking responsibility for their actions. That's the language that we would use. If that
So
makes
maybe
sense.
because maybe we would want to then tweak some of that language so it's consistent with restorative justice. Because I mean, the bottom line is it's all about, I mean, not all, but this is about accountability, and accountability is critical for restorative justice. But the way we have phrased it is not really consistent with restorative justice.
Right. No, that's a good point, Jonathan. Thank you. We're not holding anyone accountable. People are holding themselves accountable, if that makes sense. It's a significant difference. Small word change, but a big difference.
In terms of what Tracy was saying, prevention is very challenging for us because we're not involved. And I would say a lot of us in this group try to do a lot of work on prevention. That's not really what our core focus is. But I do feel like there is an area of prevention that we should be focused on, and that is the youth. And when I say the youth, I'm not necessarily talking juveniles. Juveniles is a whole different story, but those individuals who are 18 to 25. So they're adults, but they don't yet have fully developed brains, and they're committing crimes. And I feel like they're on their way to really having significant issues with the criminal justice system. And if we can focus on that population early and treat them individually and differently, like we do our individuals who have mental health issues or who have substance use disorders, focusing on these individuals and their youthfulness and lack of brain development, plus many do have some mental health issues and substance use disorders. I would like to see that, and I believe that is, and it is an area of prevention. I mean, it's not preventing them from coming into the system, but it's preventing them from getting deep into the system and going to prison.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Other thoughts on any of the objectives that's listed under the goals? I think Ian made the point earlier about when we really get into building out a strategic plan, that might be a time to really hammer out what some of these objectives looks like with timelines, with persons responsible. Oh, Ian, you just raised your hand. I won't speak for you. I'll let you speak for yourself. Go ahead, Ian.
I mean, you were going down the same path. I was just going to bring it up again that I think really I think we need to look at under each goal, whether these are like tactics to help us meet the goal or strategies, and what's the overall objective of the goal if we even want to have that. But I think moving into the next 3-year plan, we need to change the overall structure of how this is built out. That's my opinion. I'm only one member of the CCP. So if we decide not to go that way, then I think, then I would say we go into just updating or shifting language here. But if we're going to go with a structural change, I feel like we need to make that first and then kind of change some of the language. And, some of it might be little tweaks or additions by adding like dates or I think we need to add some metrics, get to the point where adding metrics to capture some of these. Then we could talk about things like 2A for me, like, okay, it says it's complete. We got a baseline of data to measure victim satisfaction. So if we completed that in this strategic plan, what do we want to do with that information for the next 3-year strategic plan? We've got a baseline now of victim satisfaction. What do we want to do with that moving forward? Do we want to set a strategy or outcome under goal 2 objective to increase victim satisfaction in Yolo County by 5%, by a certain date, or 5% year over year? And if so, then what are our, tactics or strategies to make that happen, right? And who are the kind of lead folks responsible for that?
Fair enough. Yeah. Thank you, Ian. I think you raised a really good point that, looking at a current strategic plan or one that's just completed is a really good jumping off point and thinking about, okay, we've completed some of these efforts. What does that mean to us? And what do we want to do with that going forward? I think that's a really interesting place to start a next iteration of a strategic plan process. Thank you for that. Other thoughts or comments on the objectives of our goals? Tracy, what you got?
So I was looking in the chat. I mean, Brandon
Oh.
Clark is not wrong.
Okay.
Really, the CCP money was to divert a whole section of people out of the state prison system and handle all of the issues locally, with the thought that maintaining ties to the community and working with people locally was going to help them in the long run. So he's absolutely correct. Our local CCP has always taken the view, though, that we can, do more. So that's why these prevention comments have come up. Some of our programs like Advanced Peace, even the mental health diversion, et cetera, is maybe more prevention. So I'm wondering if there's a way, and I like Carlene's suggestion to kind of change the goal. So maybe we have a prevention goal 1, what's happening in the middle of your system is goal 2, and then the reintegration and support would be goal 3, or at least that's how I interpreted what Carlene said. But I wonder if we can't try to expand the scope of what we recommend to the county, meaning the CAO and the board, to add funding, since there's so much overlap with what our CCP, who comprises it, and what we choose, wanting to do. So that we're not depleting CCP funds always on programs that are outside of the initial intention of CCP. And I'd rather that we do, if I had to pick one, I'd rather that we do one thing really, really well. And if that's reintegration, fine. But do one thing really well rather than 5 things kind of okay.
Fair enough, Tracy. Thank you. Any other comments on the objectives upholding our goals? Thoughts?
No, but Kara, we'll open it back up to public comment on 10D.
Okay.
Julie, do we have any further public comment?
Yes, we do have, looks like Brandon Clark would like to speak.
Go ahead.
Is that better? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. I'm just really concerned with the fact that county problems seem to be taken care of by state money meant for state inmates. I mean, PRCS inmates are seriously losing out on opportunities that the money was intended to provide for us. I just don't know how you guys can, speak on. And don't get me wrong, the youth prevention is definitely something that's a very noble cause and it's proven to be effective when you can intercede and do it in a meaningful way. But that's not the focus of PRCS. That's not the focus of AB 109. That's not why the county is getting money from the state. It's to provide a secondary chance, a program the state or the county actually runs. Walter's House is a private nonprofit. The county has no program of its own for residential inpatient treatment. It doesn't have any of its own curriculum to even measure metrics of success. So with a hands-off approach like that, it's no wonder that you're getting questionable results from different people, because you're not seeing things through the same rubric. You're not using the same measuring stick against the same population. But this whole focus is only supposed to be on PRCS inmates, people that would be on parole if they would have been on parole if they hadn't been for the legal change. People that didn't go to prison, or did but didn't qualify for parole for being nonviolent. I don't know why that seems like such a strange concept here, but it's frustrating. There are pilot counties, I believe it's San Jose, LA, that went and they've been implementing different programs and I don't want to say progressive because that brings like a political tone to it, but there are pilot counties that have been doing many different types of outreach. I don't even know the right term for it right now, but they've been experimenting in different ways to achieve the goal of reducing recidivism and promoting successful reintegration. And that's the goal of this. That's the whole purpose of it. That's what we don't go to prison, so we don't get training, we don't get classes, we don't get the things that we would be getting if we go on to prison. Job skills. We sit in a cell here. That's it. We get maybe some Louis L'Amour books. Like, how do you benefit from that? we come out and we get one chance at a program because there's only one program. There's a problem with the staff, and that staff, albeit they try to do a good job, but they're many times overwhelmed, understaffed, and the staff isn't even up to the level they need to be to run that program successfully. So why are we like spending the money on all these other places or even thinking about it? We don't even have one program that functions well. And I mean, I think you all have very valid points, but the thing is, everyone has their paradigm that we're seeing this from, and we're not working at it together for the one goal that we're supposed to be focused on, and that's helping people that are on PRCS not come back and not stay on PRCS. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. Julie, is there anyone else for public comment?
Yes, Maria Grijalva.
All right. Go ahead.
Thank you again. I'd like to just ditto what Brandon has said, and to I was just looking up this AB 109 funding, and to ask you to please focus on the purpose of the funding in your mission and goals and objectives. And so one of those objectives and goals should be, I agree, prevention, because without prevention, you don't have a way to stop crime from happening. And this whole goal here is to stop crime, and so that we don't have victims suffering. And so I'd like to just reiterate that, and thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Julia, is there anybody else?
I do not see any additional hands raised, Chair.
Well, thank you. I'll turn it back over to Kara and the group.
Well, I just was going to say, if there's any other comments or ideas around any part of the mission goals or objectives, I believe there are going to be subsequent meetings to really start to put together a robust, energetic, strategic plan. So I just want to thank all of the members for the conversation today and for the thinking around what is potentially a very complex, multifaceted effort. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Any other comments on anything from the CCP? Nolan?
I think my only quick comment, as a relative newcomer here too, as well, is I like the public's comments. I think they make a lot of sense, but Tracy kind of echoed the same comment. I think we should focus really a lot of our resources, time and effort on doing one or two things really, really well, and then start building from there. And I think a lot of times we take the scattershot approach and we end up doing a lot of things sort of okay. And I think that really resonates. So, maybe find our main thing, our main program, the program with the most impact and outcome, and we sink, most of our eggs in that basket, and then we sort of build on that foundation. I just think that makes a lot of sense for something like this. And I really appreciated the comments from Tracy and the public and the other folks that sort of stated that.
All right, then Ian, sorry.
Earlier, but I think some of the public comments point to like the website redesign and linking programs and, telling our story as a CCP better in the next 3 years. Because I think we are doing a lot of really cool things. And, if we focus on a couple of those core things like Nolan and Tracy and stuff have been saying and communicate that out effectively and post on our website and talk about it more publicly moving forward, I think that'll help. Because I do think there's, a lot of good areas that we built on over the last 3 years. And sometimes, we're just not always great at telling our own story. So I think some kind of objective or tactic or strategy in the plan specific around, that media communication or, public information sharing sessions, website, something along those lines, bringing back that media campaign or that media group or whatever that Tracy was talking about, something in that area I think would be useful.
So I think that's a great point, Ian. And I was going to mention that we should bring John Fout into the fold, and I see he's actually here with us. So maybe that's something we can talk about moving forward.
All good points. So the plan at this point is to take all of the information received from the CCP and the public and kind of get it together. And I think we'll, on probation side, we'll try to take a crack at putting a little bit of the verbiage together. And then we'll come back at a subsequent meeting. Our next meeting is September 12th, our next scheduled meeting. And we'll present that and we can further refine things and add to it and do what we need to do. And then later on this fall, we'll have more meetings for metrics and refining the goals and getting more into the weeds of everything. It's kind of the path forward unless anyone has a better idea. All right, well, thank you. And we'll see everybody on the 12th.